So I know it's been all about house building lately, but I want to stay connected with you guys in the gardening front because I do continue to get a lot of questions about gardening based on all the other videos I've done in the past. And I've got a little bit of a lull in activity here and have been getting some questions, a lot of the same questions over and over lately about plants, plant propagation, cuttings, things like that. And so I wanted to take some time and just sit down and try to address some of those questions in this type of format, just sitting and talking with you guys. So I'm going to take these questions just one video at a time here, and we'll start with this one. Lately, a lot of people have been asking what to do with their cuttings now. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I've answered this question in several other videos, and I have an entire playlist about what to do with your cuttings towards the end of summer, how to overwinter them, how to take care of them, and I'll put a link to that down in the description below, so go check that out. But there's an entire playlist of videos where I talk about overwintering plants in very cold regions and not as cold regions and different things that you can do to help your cuttings make it through the winter. In some of those videos, I show you exactly what I do here in Zone 8B, Western Washington State. And in one particular video, I followed cuttings all the way through the winter, showed the snow covering them and everything, just to prove to you guys that rooted cuttings are as strong as the parent plant. So go check that link out down below, and it should take you to all those videos about overwintering rooted cuttings. So the particular question I'm getting in different various ways is, what do I do with my rooted cuttings now going into the fall? And I just want to kind of address that for a minute here and talk about my thoughts on the subject. I know there's different ways to do everything, but real quickly, I don't like to disturb my cuttings going into the fall and winter. So I'm seeing people post, which I think is great. People are saying, hey, I got my rose cuttings to root. Isn't that awesome? It's the first ones I got to root. What do I do with them now? And a lot of people are talking about wanting to pull them up and put them in a new pot with soil and continue growing them. And while you can do that, and will probably get away with doing that a little bit easier in an area like maybe Southern California at this time of year, because there's plenty of warm weather left to go until you really start getting cooler, it's not going to work out as well in some very, very cold climates, like maybe up in Canada. And in my climate, it's sort of borderline whether or not that's going to set the cutting back or keep it from growing the next spring and maybe it just dies off in the winter, or actually turning into a nice, successful plant. So typically, I don't like to do anything with my rooted cuttings at this time of year. Those roses, if you are propagating the roses and you're sticking them in those pots, like a 1 gallon nursery pot, and you're putting the 2-liter soda bottle over it, and you're starting to see a little bit of rooting or maybe a little bit of top growth, and you're going, what do I do now? My best answer is don't do anything now. Just leave that thing be. Let it go. I know that in many videos I've said for roses about 6 weeks for them to root, but that's just when you first start seeing the roots. That's just when the roots are still just young and they're just starting to shoot out and maybe an inch or maybe even 3 inches long. It just depends on the cutting, but they really aren't fully rooted. They really don't have a big aggressive root system yet, and you really don't want to be pulling them up at that time. You just want to leave them be. And what's more, you really don't want to be pulling them up going into colder climate in wintertime. So here it's August 25th. I think it's August 25th. We will be headed into cooler weather here soon through September. Now, we typically have Indian summers where it stays warmer and sunnier longer into the fall. It will probably do that again this year. That's what the forecast is looking like. It's pretty dry around here. It's pretty sunny. But all of a sudden October comes and it just changes and gets cold. So I really don't like to disturb those young rooted cuttings right now. I want them to be able to use all of that warmth through September to continue growing massive roots. What I would do right now at this time is I would fertilize them with a weak fertilizer solution, just a liquid fertilizer, Miracle Grow, something like that, so that you can give them a little boost green up that new growth and give them some, nutrients to work with so they can get just fully ready to rock and roll going into the winter. So they've got every chance they need going into winter, and then when they make it through the other side, they've got nutrients stored up in them to take off in the springtime. I don't recommend slow release fertilizer at this time of year because it's going to want to be fertilizing them when things are trying to go dormant, and I don't like that. And I don't like to push a ton of green succulent growth right now when it's just going to die back, and it tends to die back real hard when you push a lot of green growth this time of year. So leave them be. Just let your cuttings continue to root in through the year. Don't try to up pot them. Don't try to put them into a new pot and grow these beautiful plants. I don't even like to bring them indoors. Some people want to bring them indoors. Now, if it's petunias and you're going to grow them through the winter, then you're going to have to bring them indoors, but you don't have to right yet. But you are going to have to bring them indoors eventually. But like your roses or your landscape shrubs that are going to stay outside, I don't bring them indoors. I leave them outside, and I typically leave them in this hoop house, or I bring things that I'm doing outside into this hoop house. And I've done a lot of videos on that. This hoop house is not heated through the winter. I leave both ends open all winter long. Plants in here freeze hard as a rock through the winter. The potting soil is hard as a rock. The leaves on these rhododendrons are all drooped way over. It looks like everything's dead, but they all bounce back in the spring. What this hoop house does more than anything is provide shade in the summer, and it prevents rain from just oversaturating these pots through the winter, and it gives a little bit of protection from cold, hard, fast frost. But after that, it freezes hard as a rock here in the winter. If you don't have something like this, then I recommend just taking those cuttings and putting them inside of an unheated garage or an unheated shed, somewhere where they're still gonna freeze or they're gonna go dormant, but they're not gonna be staying awake and trying to grow all winter long like they would indoors in your warm house. That's not a bad thing, but if you do choose to do that, you're gonna have to come up with some form of lighting, and you're going to have to continue fertilizing through the winter and growing these things, pruning these plants. And typically a lot of these landscape plants, they do better when they get some dormancy period. They come back the next spring and just take off. I found that especially the case with figs. I know a lot of people root them through the winter, and I've got some I'm going to be rooting through this winter, but when I start them in the winter time, they typically don't take off as much as they normally would in the spring as when I root them in the summer, let them go dormant through the winter. In the spring, they just are ready to rock and roll, and they shoot off a ton of new growth. So anyway, there's that opinion on that. I really don't recommend you do anything with your rooted cuttings right now. I don't recommend pulling them up and trying to pot them into something else. You might get away with it. I've done it before myself, but I just think it's better if you just leave them where they're at. Let them just continue what they're already doing, and they'll be twice as far along as if you would have disturbed them, set them back, and tried to put them in a pot or something like that. There is one thing that I have talked about, and I think I've put it in one of those videos that's in that link down there about overwintering cuttings, and that is this. I have done this, and I do recommend, if you're worried at all, to do this. If you have a pot, we'll just say you got a pot like this size. It doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't have to be clear, but you've got a pot this size, and you want to up pot it or something. Don't, and the cutting is just starting to root in there. Don't pull it out of this pot. Just leave it in this pot. Let it continue doing its thing in here. Give it its weak fertilizer solution with a liquid fertilizer. And then get a bigger pot that's like 2 or 3 gallon or something, much bigger. And then put this down in there. Actually put some material, some soil, potting soil, something at the bottom for an inch or two. Put this down in there and then fill around it with the rest of your potting soil so that this is sitting down inside that pot. It's still in the same pot, but what that will do is just buffer. So as the roots in this little cutting are hitting the edge of this pot here, and they're starting to circle around, those roots are going to be touching the edge of a pot that's going to get real cold real fast when the cold weather hits. But if you've got it sitting down, surrounded by bark and another bigger pot, when that cold air hits that pot, it takes longer for that frost to hit that side of the pot that the cutting is in. And so it just creates kind of a buffer. Yeah, it's still going to freeze hard as a rock, but it slows down the process to where a cold, hard, fast frost isn't going to zap those roots. It's going to give them time to acclimate and start hardening off and going dormant instead of dying. So there you go. I've just been getting that question a lot lately. I wanted to answer it here for you guys now. Like I said, I've got that playlist with a ton of videos about overwintering rooted cuttings, and you can probably take some of those ideas and apply them to your area and your situation. If you do want to grow them indoors, that's great. You've seen me over the years grow lots of plants indoors. You just have to come up with, well, your house is already warm, but you have to come up with some form of a lighting system, and you're going to have to continue fertilizing and pruning through the winter. If you're up for the challenge, go for it. A lot of people do it. It can be a lot of fun. You just need a little spot to do it all, and there you go. That's all you need to get set up. But in the meantime, check out that playlist. I think you'll come up with some good ideas. I hope you guys learned something from this. If you did, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe if you want to follow along. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.